Hello, hello, hello. I'm Hojo.
I'm Hunnsy'S.
And welcome to this, the 30th episode of Hojo and Hunnsy'S Hard Rock House, the safe space for old rock gumbies just like us, where we're changing the name of the podcast to Hojo and Hunnsy'S Soul Shaking Shack. If Def Leppard's new single's anything to go by, have you heard it?
I haven't. Is it called Soul Shaking Shack?
No, it's called Stand By Me, and it's a cover of Benny King's soul song.
Oh, right, okay. Is it any good? I haven't heard it, so I'm not
Yeah, it's all right. It's just a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Didn't have Def Leppard down as doo-wopping soul boys.
Didn't they do a covers album years ago? Didn't they do Sweet and T-Rex and...
Yeah.
What was that called?
Wasn't that the one that was called Yeah, that somebody memorably just wrote a one-word review that was no?
Oh, yeah, I think it was. So Undeterred, they're having another go.
Undeterred. Very strange.
You know, they released that single, I think it was last year. Was it called 74 or something, which was clearly a homage to glam rock? I thought that was quite good. I don't know what you thought of
that. Not much. I always have to predicate that by going, I like the people in Def Leppard very much, but a lot of their music leaves me a bit cold, I must say.
Oh, I don't know. You were listening to Pyromania the other week.
I was.
You were very positive about that record.
I was, apart from the production. Do you think that record sounds dated now?
Well, when you compare it to Hysteria, yeah. We're talking about Pyromania again. Even though Pyromania at the time was, wow, this is different. They moved the needles, but then it took them so long to make Hysteria, didn't it?
It was more the fact that all those records sound dated. That period with Mutt Lange, to me, sounds totally of its time and, synthetic and doesn't feel like a real band.
Are you including other work by Mutt Lange at that time? Are you saying that all the stuff he did with the Cars, Foreigner 4 and blah, blah?
No, because I don't think they sounded similar, did he? You can't say Back in Black sounded like Hysteria, and he produced both those records. I think by the time he got to Def Leppard, he was very excited about studio technology and perfection and making sure that everything was in the right sonic bandwidth to appeal to American radio and all that stuff.
He did do that on Back in Black as well. I don't know whether you've listened to it.
What, Back in Black? I have listened to it.
No, the Brian Johnson autobiography. I say listen, and it's a book, but I like the audio book when I'm walking the dogs.
It's hard to walk a dog while reading a book.
It is, so I choose to do the audio version of books that are available. So I listened to the Jono one, and he talks about the recording of Back in Black and Mutt Lange, the attention to detail and all that sort of stuff. There's a brilliant bit in the book where he talks about how Mutt Lange got him in there to record the vocals. The great thing about Brian Johnson's book is he narrates it, right? So like he does it in his full story. And he does this great bit where he talks about his vocals. And he said, shake a leg, shoot a thrill. He was going, he got me to go to a different level. I was going, Mutt, man, I cannot reach that high. And then Mutt Lange was going, you've got to go higher, Jono. You've got to go higher. He's going, I can't get higher, man. And he... But he said he literally was like a workhorse going, you've got to go higher. And then it's really good.
Should he have been a host on Play Your Cards Right?
Higher, higher. He goes back to Newcastle after he finished recording it. Cliff goes back first, then Phil Rudd. And he says, then, Angus and Malton stayed behind to fiddle around for a bit. And they sent me home. And he says, at this point, I still didn't even know if I was in the band because they just flew me out there, did the record. And he says, I got back anyway. This vinyl copy of the album turns up at my mum's house or something. And he says, I rang my mate up who had a record player. So I rang him up and I says, I'm coming round, I've got the album. This is Back in Black, right? This is an album that sold. How many copies? 40 million?
Yeah, something stupid.
Something stupid. And he basically goes around to his mate's house and he goes, I've got the album. And he says, is it all right if I put it on? He says, I put it on. So he says, I've got to remember this is the first time I'd heard it as well. He says, so we put it on, cracked open a can of beer, sat down and just started playing it. And he stopped after 2 songs. My mate stopped, he took the needle off and he said, Brian! What the fuck have they done to your voice, man? It's shite! They've ruined your voice, man. What the fuck's that screaming? Oh, he says you're so funny. But yeah, that's Mutt Lange, you see. That's Mutt Lange.
Well, he knows how to ruin things to the tune of 40 million, I suppose. Again, I'm not knocking the man's ability to produce hit records. I was just saying that I think that record sounds terrible in 2025. Not Back in Black, Hysteria.
Not Hysteria, Pyromania.
Well, either.
All right, okay, you're having a go at both, okay.
Only of the production.
I'll tell you what I was listening to the other day by Def Leppard. I was listening to High and Dry. Now, there's
that's my favourite Def Leppard album by miles.
First 4 tracks, just amazing, just punching.
But isn't that what I'm saying? That's the sweet spot of well-produced, but not overproduced.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Joe and the boys will go, look at my wad after Hysteria, and that's all the justification they need. And they're quite right from that point of view. But I'm not in the band. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I'm allowed to say that the most commercially successful isn't my favourite. I personally don't really like the way those records sound.
Okay.
And they'll go, and you are poor and I am very rich. So
Exactly.
fuck off.
So fuck off, yeah.
Fair comment, really. What have you been listening to this week?
All right, we're on to that now, are we?
We're just going to go on and on and on about this because there is no resolution. They've got money. I've got my opinion.
Yeah, I know which one I'd rather have.
Well, exactly.
What have I been listening to? Maybe you should get Mutt Lange in to produce the next Dawn After Dark album.
Yeah, I think he'd really be moved by that idea. Can you imagine if I just went, oh, no, Mutt, sorry. Didn't really like Hysteria. Don't think you're the man for the job.
What have I been listening to? I'm going to try and explain the reason for what I've been listening to first in a succinct way. Okay, so on the last pod, we mentioned the sad passing of John Sykes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I went back, listened to a bit of Tigers of Pantown. I'm going to go back and listen to what he did with Whitesnake. I'm going to listen to what he did with Lizzie. Watched a few videos of when he was in Lizzie. And there was one particular show that's on YouTube that I was at, which was on a TV programme in Newcastle, which I think we've mentioned before, called The Tube. And I was at that show and they did Cold Sweat. They did Boys Are Back in Town. I was watching the performance and there's on the keyboards Darren Wharton. And I'm thinking, Darren Wharton. Interesting. So I went back and looked at when he joined Lizzie because I wasn't quite sure of how he ended up in Lizzie. I know he played Session on Chinatown and I saw him on the Renegade tour. And then I started digging into Darren Wharton, Thin Lizzy, went back and listened to Renegade. Then I went down a bit of a Darren Wharton rabbit hole. Deformed Dare, didn't he? That Out of the Silence debut album that Dare made, I think it was 88. Yes, I'm in the AOR wheelhouse again. I've gone from Venom last week.
Yeah. But you've reverted to type.
I've gone back to the heartlands of AOR. I haven't been listening to Out of the Silence. Very familiar with that record. That and Indiscreet by FM, the two quintessential, probably the most well-known British AOR albums. Yeah?
Okay.
But that's not the album I've been listening to. I've been listening to their second album called Blood from Stone. Do you know that record?
Not at all.
So Out of the Silence did pretty well as a debut album, but then the follow-up, Blood from Stone, just died a death and they ended up getting dropped from the label, blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing started to fall by the wayside. But Dare is still going, 11 albums in now. They've had a few lineup changes, but I thought, right, I'm going to go back and listen to Blood from Stone because they've actually re-recorded it. And you can go and listen to the 2024 version on all good streaming platforms and some bad ones. Bloody hell, what a record. The production, obviously they've got a completely different lineup now to what that lineup was when it was originally recorded. Because you know Brian Cox was in the band, Professor Brian Cox.
I was going to ask that question because professional stargazer Brian Cox presumably replaced Darren Wharton, did he?
It's kind of weird because Darren was known as a keyboard player, but obviously in Dare he's the frontman, isn't he?
Oh, is he? Right, I didn't know.
Yeah. He's the frontman.
Does he have a keytar?
He probably did at some point.
Quick diversion. What did you think of the keytar?
It was one of those things, wasn't it, where you kind of went, I know it enables the keyboard player to move, but I don't want to see keyboard players moving around. I want keyboard players behind dry ice.
It was the ultimate disgrace, wasn't it, of 80s rock, the keytar. What a stupid invention.
Professor Brian Cox was obviously in the band originally. I think he did the first two records and then he left.
He traded his keytar for a telescope.
Yeah. So can we get back to the thing? Go and check out, obviously you can check out the original 1991 album.
But you prefer the re-recorded version?
It's the one that I have been listening to. I'm not going to say preferred, right? I'm going to say it's got a totally different vibe to it, man. Out of the Silence, the first record was a classic, lots of keyboards, classic wimp wire, AOR sort of stuff. Maybe Blood from Stone didn't do it because it was actually heavier. It was a much harder album than Out of the Silence. Now, I don't know whether it was that shocked their core audience or whether the record company went, that's not what we want. But the guitar sound is harder, it's heavier. It's still classic AOR, but clearly they've got Lizzie influences, which is obvious. You know, Darren was Lynn Lizzie. But it's a really, really good hard rock album that if you go back and listen to that sort of stuff that was coming out around 87, 88, 89, that sort of period, it's up there in terms of quality of songwriting. The guitars come with a real attack. And I've been listening to it continuously for about the last 3 or 4 days, just going, fuck me, why wasn't this album?
What are the songs that stand out?
Live to Fight Another Day. There's a song called Chains, which is epic. The first 6, 7 songs are so strong. Anybody who goes, Out of the Silence is the album for me, I think you need to listen to Blood from Stone. And they've done some really good stuff since then. They're going down more of a Celtic vibe. And I know that Darren's taken a hiatus to do Darren Wharton's Renegade, which I think he's going out on the road doing all those songs from Renegade that obviously he did with Lizzie. But yeah, Blood from Stone by Dare. The 2024 re-recording of the original 1991 album.
That's what people should be checking out on your recommendation.
Correct. What have you been listening to?
Okay, you like to always go, I've listened to this album, I think it's fucking amazing. I'm breaking tradition going, I've listened to this album and it's really not amazing. We've said this before. You don't have to love everything you've been listening to, do you? You might be listening to it for all kinds of reasons. Self-hatred, annoying the neighbours, pissing off your wife.
Yeah.
All those things could be reasons for playing a record. You don't have to like it.
Yeah, but generally you wouldn't put a record on that you don't like.
Well, that's exactly what I did. I put a record on that I didn't know that I didn't like, but I suspected I wouldn't like it.
Is it an album that you disliked at the time and gave it 0 Ks out of?
No, it was an album that I just didn't bother with at the time. I was reading about it the other day and I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to give it a chance and decide whether it's any good.
Immediately when you said that you were going to talk about an album that you didn't like, I thought you were going to talk about White Lion's Big Game album, which you didn't like very publicly.
I didn't like that record. You're right. I haven't listened to it since, to be fair. So maybe it's grown on me, though I doubt it.
Can you please, either next week or the week after, go back and listen to White Lion's Big Game and see if you still feel the same way you did when you reviewed it in Kerrang?
I will, but it's likely that I'll think it's ridiculous because Big Game immediately makes me think of Spinal Tap. Do you remember that lyric?
No.
From Big Bottom, where it goes, Big Game is waiting there inside her tights. You got to go and listen to that because that's funny. So obviously every time I hear the title Big Game, I just think of the song Big Bottom.
Right, okay.
So it doesn't augur well for me liking it, does it?
It doesn't, but please do go back and listen to it. And I do know that your aforementioned review of Big Game in Kerrang is flying around on the internet somewhere. It has been passed around.
It's legendary, though.
It's a legendary review. And I don't know whether you were responsible for ruining White Lion or Mike Tramp's career.
You said Mike Tripe.
Mike Tripe.
That's the northern version. He's in Dare. Northern AOR. Tripe would be a great name for a Northern AOR band, wouldn't it?
But anyway, what have you been listening to?
I've been listening to a 1985 album by The Firm. Do you know who The Firm are?
That was Paul Rodgers, wasn't it? It was a sort of spin-off of Bad Company, wasn't it? Was it Jimmy Page?
Yeah, it was Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers in The Firm, which you would really think would be a match made in heaven. The dream team of rock, wouldn't you?
Yeah, the greatest rock vocalist.
Certainly you could argue one of the greats.
Yeah, and Jimmy Page. This has got to work.
This is a match made in heaven. Unfortunately, the vinyl proves otherwise. At the time, I don't know why it passed me by. Maybe I had a very cursory listen to it and nothing really hit me. But I thought when I read about it again this week, I would go back and have a listen and see whether the passage of time had been kind or cruel. It's my sad duty to report that it's been cruel.
Wasn't Chris Slade in?
Chris Slade played drums. Charlie Franklin was the bass player.
Yeah.
You'd really thought that there was going to be a pile of great rock songs there delivered by masters of the art form. But you know what? 9 songs, really ho-hummy. You listen to it and you go...
Which album you listened to? Because they did 2, didn't they?
Yeah, the first one, The Firm.
The Firm,
the one that's called The Firm, 1985. Debut album. It's so all right. You can't even raise enthusiasm to go, oh, it's really, really shit.
Right.
It's not. Okay. It's just, I found myself drifting after the second song and thinking about spaghetti or what football match is on the telly this weekend or whatever. Even with that incredible voice that Paul Rodgers got, even with Jimmy's incredible guitar playing.
If it was a school report, would it say must do better?
Oh, no, I think it would be worse than that. It would be capable of so much more. When you know you've been dotting around at the back of class and looking out the window and not paying any attention. They were capable of so much more.
What was the story behind it happening? Was it a conversation in a pub and they went, oh, should we do a record?
I can tell you what Paul Rodgers said at the time. He said Jimmy was at a bit of a loose end. He'd come round and check out my home studio and we ended up writing songs without any definite plans. Jimmy was very keen to get on the road, so we put a band together. The first thing I knew, knew was that he had to be writing songs again. I'd already seen one of my friends going down that road in Kos, and it wasn't going to happen again, presumably talking about drug addiction. Apparently, there was talk of there being a band with Page, Bill Bruford, who was the drummer in King Crimson, and Pino Palladino. Do you remember the bass player who was on absolutely everything in the 80s?
Yeah.
Anyway, that was apparently where it all came from, and maybe Paul Rodgers was trying to keep Jimmy on the straight and narrow. I don't know. So maybe there was a need to make a record, and the need to make a record might have been greater than the need to make a great record from Jimmy's personal point of view.
Yeah.
And how good it was, secondary. I'm not here to knock that. If that helped him in his recoveries, that's great.
They did some gigs, didn't they? I'm sure they
Yeah,
did.
they toured, and I didn't go and see it. I wasn't really that interested. They didn't play any old material at all. That was the thing. They said they're only going to play stuff by The Firm and song from Rodgers' solo album Cut Loose, and some stuff that Jimmy played from that Death Wish 2 film soundtrack that he'd done.
So they refused to play any
They
Zeppelin.
didn't play the songs that people wanted to hear, and that's fine. They probably had their reasons for that. But I listened to the album again. What are we now? It's 40 years later, isn't it? And nothing to see, move along. But it was an interesting experience to go back and listen to something and go, yeah, not really.
Franklin went and joined Blue Murder with Sykes, didn't he?
Franklin was in Blue Murder. There are always 6 degrees of separation in rock, aren't there?
Slade went and did AC/DC for a while, didn't he?
See, back to the same groups.
It's funny, it reminds me, right? This week I was having a conversation about heavy metal with Paul Goodrelli, and we were talking about King Cobra. We were talking about that Thrill of a Lifetime album, which I will talk about because it's in that AOR space. It's considered as one of the classic AOR albums.
I love Carmine Apiece. He's like a gangster. I interviewed him not very long ago, and he was really funny.
King Cobra is still going, and this was the thing that me and Paul were pissing ourselves laughing
Carmine's not involved, is he?
We originally started talking about the fact that Wasp have announced a new British tour, right? Doing the first album.
Which he said he'd never do.
He said he would never do the first album because he'd got Fuck Like a Beast on. He said he was not going to play that again.
He's a religious man now.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know how you square that, do you, really? Is he going to bleep his own word out?
Who knows? But we were talking about that. Then we got into Johnny Rod, who obviously was in Wasp and was also in King Cobra. And then I started going, King Cobra have just released a new album, I think last year. And do you know who's in them now? In the current lineup of King Cobra, Carmine Apiece, still in there.
He's still there, Carmine.
Rowan Robertson's on guitar.
Okay, yeah.
But this is the best bit. Johnny Rod, he's still there on bass. But the vocalist is Paul Shortino from Rough Cut.
Okay, yeah.
Right? And the other guitarist is Carlos Cavazzo from Quiet Riot.
Brilliant.
So it's unbelievable.
I saw some pictures of Johnny Rod. He doesn't look the same.
No, he doesn't. No.
Do you remember, he was always a shirt-off, bleached blonde hair California guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he had the hair extensions, didn't he? He sort of reminded me of Vim Fuego from Bad News.
He don't look like that anymore.
Well, I don't think any of them look like what they looked like back in 1983 or 84, do they?
So anyway, clearly, I'm the wrong person to do this podcast. You should be doing it with Paul Elliott and talking about King Cobra till Kingdom Come.
Oh, we haven't talked about them yet, Kingdom Come. We will talk about them.
No, we will. So there you go, The Firm. Not really a recommendation, but you might be interested to go and see whether I'm talking out of my Harris.
1985. So you'd have been on Kerrang in 1985, wouldn't you?
I was.
Right. So a couple of questions on that. Did they warrant a front cover?
They would absolutely have been on the front cover because they're going to sell you copies, aren't they?
I was a huge Free fan. I liked Zeppelin. Not massive Zeppelin fan, but I liked them. I honestly don't remember any kind of feeling that I had about it when it came. I was like, all right, okay, that's a bit odd. You'd think I would have gone, fucking hell, Paul Rodgers, Jimmy Page, this is going to be amazing.
I was the same as you. I was ho-humming my way through that project.
Yeah. What's the next section?
You don't know, after all the fuss you've made about it.
Oh, Mr. X. So if you remember, a long, long time ago, I talked about probably in the top 2 greatest AOR albums of all time, which was the debut album by New York's Diving for Pearls and Danny Malone, the singer of Diving for Pearls, who now lives in Brighton. We should harass him on Facebook, and blah, 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 which I did. And we got him on. We interviewed him. And we then went and met Danny in London for a few beers, didn't we?
Except he didn't drink, so it was just you and me.
Yeah.
He was on the water.
I think we both got a bit pissed, didn't we? I think he ran away scared.
I think he did. It's very nice, though, wasn't he?
Lovely, very nice man.
That was before Christmas.
We did the interview and then I had to bugger off because I was doing something else. And I got really jealous because you stayed on the line with Danny for about another hour, didn't you? And just chatted.
Yeah.
I was messaging you good. Are you still on the call with him? And you were good. Yes, I am. And you were just good. He's my friend now. My wonderful co-host has now edited said interview into a brilliant piece of content that we are going to put out.
We're going to do it right now. We're going to give a little teaser right here, right now. And when everyone's heard that, they'll be excited to go and listen to the full, unexpurgated version.
Which I will release the day after this. Yeah.
You will release it the day after this episode comes out, and everybody will be able to hear the glory that is Danny Malone and the story, the very interesting story of diving for pearls. He was a super nice guy and super interesting. And the only thing I would say, though, is he did promise to send us a load of unreleased stuff from that album he did. He did an album with Elliot Easton from the Cars, didn't he, with Roy Thomas Baker producing. Remember that?
Yeah, called The Dunaways.
And he said he was going to send us all sorts of unreleased stuff. Where the fuck is it, Danny?
It's in the same place where the T-shirts are from Michael Coons.
Exactly.
So, Danny, I know you listen to the show. Pull your finger out, stick it on something, and stick it in the post.
Stick it in the post? That's a tremendously old school way. In no way is he going to send it digitally.
I'll send a bike to pick it up. I think an interview with Danny Malone, of which he hasn't done, if any, hardly any over the years, talking about Diving for Pearls, is going to break the AOR internet. Okay,
so should we just give a quick taster now, and people can judge for themselves the sheer genius of our interview with Danny Malone from Diving for Pearls?
Definitely, let's do it.
Danny, let me ask you, when the first album was finished, what were your honest thoughts about it? Second thing, why didn't it happen? And third thing, what did that mean for you? Obviously, you ended up in the band with Elliot, but presumably Diving for Pearls split because you just went, there's no future in it.
Yeah, I had really high hopes for that record when we finished it. It was recorded in Nashville. I think we all left Nashville and felt really, really good about it. I think the people at Epic felt really good about it. There was every reason to believe that the band could do well. Back then, if your first single didn't really fly out the door, they spent a lot of money on a video. We made that video. I don't think it looks like a high budget video in a lot of ways, but it was a really high budget video. I mean, they spent a couple $100,000, which back in 1989 was an enormous amount of money. And it did really, really well in some places. And that's where they sent us to play. And we worked our asses off, frankly. We played a lot of one night shows. And then it came time for a second single, and you needed a second video. And because I don't think they got the response that they wanted on the first one, it's maybe $250,000 investment for a second video, which if you didn't have a video back, MTV still ruled. If you weren't getting played on MTV, radio could help, but you needed both, frankly. Powers that be, a guy named Don Grierson, who is the senior vice president of Epic Records, I think at the time, or maybe even the president, just decided that they weren't going to spend the money on the second video. And then the whole thing just started to fall apart very, very quickly after that. I don't mind telling you, they picked up our option. When you sign a record deal, or when you signed a record deal back in the 80s, you signed like a 6-record deal. Yeah. They had you locked up for 6 records. So they picked up our second option and we started rehearsing. We even did demos with David Prater, 4 or 5 songs. So they hadn't given up on us. I think they'd just given up on that record. But now it's like 1991. And then it wasn't long after that Nirvana came along. And believe it or not, Diving for Pearls was managed by the same people that managed Nirvana. Goldmine Entertainment, who managed me for years and had been managing Nirvana for a very, very long time. The bottom fell out of that whole thing. It wasn't just us. We're not the only casualties of all of that. Bands like Warrant and Winger and all kinds of bands basically disappeared after that.
Grunge came in and just wiped out hundreds of bands.
It really did, man. And it was really, really disheartening for somebody like me because it becomes really, really difficult to change horses in the middle of a street. It's hard to go from being a poodlehead to a convincing, believable grunt, and that just was never me anyway. I tried something completely different after that. By the mid-90s, I was much more into the Britpop thing than I was into the grunge thing. That was that whole project with Glenn. Glenn and I stayed involved for many, many years and wrote songs together, and most of those were Beatle-influenced pop songs.
And what was that project called?
Again, never got signed, never released, but it was called The Dunaways. It was total power pop. I was lucky enough. I did manage to get another publishing deal. A guy named John Tita, who sadly just died, signed me to Warner Chappell. I think John really, really believed in me at the time. By this time, I'm 35, 36 years old. So it's a tough sell. But John really did believe in me, and he tried desperately to get that band, The Dunaways, a record deal, and that just never happened.
So what do you think, Hunnsy? Do you think that was worth the build-up?
He was friendly, he was funny, very open to talk about stuff. And he's 67, which is kind of like, fuck, man, I never knew that.
And you couldn't stop telling him how good looking he was.
Now I'm way off 67. I look much worse than him. Anyway, lovely fella. The full interview will be put online tomorrow.
So there you go, Hunsy. I finally managed to deliver on my age-old promise. Right, I guess that wraps us up, doesn't it, for this week?
I think so. Episode 30 is done in the can.
All that remains to be done is for me to edit the damn thing.
Exactly. Shouldn't take you that long.
Right, we're done for another week.
Yeah, I'll speak to you next week.
Marvellous. All right then, I'll catch you this time next week.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.